In April 1972, a room in South London saw a murder. The murder led to 3 unfair convictions and 1, perhaps 2 suicides, and major reforms in the criminal justice system. Michel Confay was born, Maxwell Thomas Barty Confay, in the Seychelles in 1945, of mixed-race heritage. After being brought up in the Seychelles and Kenya, Confay migrated to the UK in 1963. On reaching adulthood, Confay undertook sexual relationships with men, wore wigs and women's clothing frequently, and used the name Michelle. In 1969, after a suicidal episode, Confay became a sex worker in the West End and was convicted thrice as a result, with a prison sentence arising from the 3rd conviction in December 1971. A 4th trial was in the offing when Confay was killed. In this period, Michelle seems to have been a recognized local figure, acquiring the nickname Handbag. Around 1970, Michelle met a man named Winston Good in a pub called the Black Bull in Lewisham. The pub is now the Fox in Firkin. It is a very lively venue today. Winston Good, a migrant from Jamaica who was 31 in 1970, was a steelworker who owned 27 Doggett Road. Winston lived with his wife, Lillian Good, also originally Jamaican, and their children. There were 5 by 1972. Michelle and Winston struck up a friendship. Winston, who was bisexual, began to show this more openly. Winston's relationship with Lillian broke down over 1971. They still lived in the same house, but Winston lived separately in a room of his own and only spent time with the children at weekends. Winston had his own circle of friends and casual sexual partners, whom he would let into his room and entertain separately from the rest of the household. The house is arranged on 3 floors: lower ground, upper ground, and first. Winston lived in the front room on the lower ground floor, where there was also a kitchen used by the whole household, whereas his wife and children occupied the 2 rooms on the upper ground floor. The first floor was let to lodgers. After release in January 1972, Confay moved into 27 Doggett Road as a lodger of Winston on the first floor of the building. Winston, at this point, began to dress as a woman openly. Michelle and Winston would cook and eat meals together, or go out to pubs such as the Black Bull or the Castle, a local pub which had a reputation as a gay-friendly place. COVID killed off its latest incarnation, and it's now a sushi restaurant. Gay-friendly pubs and clubs in the local area, or the West End, or private parties, sometimes in trans guise. Confay received many visitors, mainly white men. However, in the run-up to the 21st April, a coolness had developed between Michelle and Winston. There had allegedly been an argument when Confay had taken offense at being described as Winston's paid lover. Confay had used racist terms against Winston. Confay had a sexual relationship with another member of their circle. This figure was referred to as Mr. AX in the official inquiry. His brother was known as Mr. BX. AX and BX would frequently meet up with Michelle for sex, sometimes involving other men. In the week leading up to the 21st, various witnesses gave information about Confay's movements, but they are convulsiting. Michelle and Winston, as well as the X brothers, had met up over the weekend, but Winston had not seen Confay by his own account since Tuesday, 18th April. On the evening of Wednesday, 19th April, Lillian Good saw Confay come in with a white man. She did not know who the white man was, but she had seen him with Confay before. On Friday, 21st April, between 3 p.m. and 3:30 p.m., Confay was seen at a restaurant and at the Castle pub, according to witnesses. At 4 p.m., she was visited by a female friend, Kay Smith, who said Confay was ironing a trouser suit and preparing to go out with a man to a pub in Deptford. It is worth pointing out that the post-mortem found no evidence of food in Confay's stomach, but there was evidence that Confay had drunk, and there was no sign of any alcohol in her room. Meanwhile, on the same day, Winston had left work at 4:30, shopped until then, and returned home at 6. By his own account, he washed in the bathroom around 6:30 p.m., and then went to bed around 7:30 p.m., being tired, and also being in a low mood because of his estrangement from Confate. Mr. AX spent Friday 21st on his own account, in a house containing a doctor's surgery, where he was employed and had a room to sleep in. Lillian and the children had tea in the course of the evening, and then watched television until close down, with the children falling asleep, and Lillian switching off the TV at close down. At some point before 1 a.m. on Saturday, 22nd April, Confay was strangled in Confate's room. The opinion of the pathologists was that the act was committed with a length of electrical flex. They judged this by the marks left on Confate's neck. A length of flex Witten could have been so used was found in Confate's room during a police search on the morning of Monday the 24th of April. It had been placed underneath papers in a drawer in a cupboard in the room. Winston identified the flex as one he had given to Confay, and appeared distressed when shown the item. At some point around 1 a.m. on the morning of Saturday, the 22nd of April, a fire was started on the lower ground floor of 27 Doggett Road. The fire was begun in a cupboard where Lillian stored clothing and curtains for the house. The fuel used was paraffin from an old paraffin heater, which was out of order. Winston stated to police that he was awakened around 1 a.m. by the sound of crackling. He got up, discovered the fire, and called out to Confate. Hearing no response, he assumed Confate was out. Winston then alerted his family. His wife was already up. She told him to call the fire brigade. Lillian thought that Winston's distress was unusual, given that all that had happened was that a fire had broken out. It was also notable that, despite saying that he had been asleep before being awoken by the fire, Winston was fully dressed. Winston passed down the road to Catford Bridge railway station, where there were, and indeed still are, phone booths for public use. But he did not use the phone. His neighbor, who had followed him to the booth, found him inside the booth, still in deep distress. The neighbor made the call. The fire service responded to the call at 1:25 a.m. Firemen wearing breathing appliances discovered Confay's body 10 minutes later, and the fire was finally extinguished around 2 a.m. After the fire was put out, matters passed into the hands of the local police. Firstly, Detective Inspector Stockwell, and then Detective Chief Superintendent Jones, the senior detective for the Met Police Division, which covered the area. When Dr. Bain, the police surgeon, and then Professor Cameron, the senior pathologist who was called in, examined the body, the police, having gained some idea of Confay's life, advised the doctors not to carry out any examination of rectal temperature at the scene, as it was thought possible at this stage that there could be valuable evidence in Confay's rectum. This was a serious error and a departure from sensible forensic practice. It could have been possible to take swabs and read the temperature without a serious issue, but the lack of a rectal temperature made it harder to determine an accurate time of death. In addition, the fireman who first discovered Confay's body saw clear signs of rigor, but both Bain and Professor Cameron, to a greater extent, suggested the rigor was just setting in at the time of examination. This suggested that the death took place later than it actually did. D.C.S. Jones's first target on arrival was Winston, and he subjected him to sustained questioning over what remained of the night and the early morning. Jones reached the conclusion that Winston was a physically and mentally weak character who would have been easily pressured to admit to the murder had he really carried it out. Jones may well have been motivated by a contempt for Winston's sexuality. Nevertheless, he decided to look further afield. In Catford, at this time, there were 3 young men: Colin Lattimore, Ronald Layton, and Amit Saleh. Colin was the oldest, at 18, but he had been diagnosed as subnormal in the jargon of the time. Colin had received most of his schooling at special schools and had held down a variety of different jobs, holding only one for very young. He was seen to be mentally considerably younger than his age. Ronald Layton was 16. He had spent long periods of his childhood in care. Amit Saleh had just turned 14. He had migrated with his family to the UK at the age of 6. At that time, increasingly brutal crackdowns by the Nicosia government on the Turkish minority caused many Turkish Cypriots to flee to the UK. He had not been a regular attender of school. All 3 of them were known to the police for various acts of petty crime, but none of the crimes involved violence against other people. Layton split his living arrangements between his grandparents, who lived in Doggett Road, and his mother, who lived in Westdown Road a short distance away. Saleh and Lattimore both lived in Nelgard Road, which is the road to the east of Doggett Road. These 3 young men were friends. On the evening of Friday, 21st April, Colin Lattimore spent most of his time at a Salvation Army youth club in Brownhill Road, alongside his brother. Layton and Saleh spent most of the evening at either Layton's house or Saleh's house, partly in the company of Saleh's sister and a 13-year-old girl, and then they sought between 12:30 and 1:30 a.m. to rob a local shoe repair shop in Plassey Road. Layton and Saleh had briefly been as far as Catford Bus Garage, but apart from that, all the locations where they had been are within easy walking distance of 27 Doggett Road. Around the time when the first responders were arriving at Doggett Road, Layton and Saleh were arrested near the shoe shop for the burglary. They were released into the care of their mothers around 4 a.m. On Monday, 24th April, Layton and Saleh met up and broke into 1 Nelgard Road, setting the coal bunker on fire. During this time, Colin Lattimore met up with them. The 3 then made their way to the nearby Ladywell Fields, where they set a sports hut on fire, before moving on to Catford Bridge Station and setting another fire there. The 3 were seen running away from the Ladywell fire, and their presence was reported to police. A police officer spotted Lattimore shortly afterwards in Nelgard Road. He took Lattimore to his grandparents' house, where he found the other 2 boys, and questioned all 3 of them about the 3 fires. The police constable then asked Lattimore about the Doggett Road. According to the constable's notes, Lattimore replied, "I was with Ronnie, we lit it, but we put it out, but it was smoking when we left." The 3 were taken to Lewisham Police Station. During the questioning session, a trainee detective constable, Peter Wallage, pursued the Doggett Road angle with all 3 boys. Each boy later alleged that Woolidge assaulted them and threatened them with porridge unless they admitted involvement in the Doggett Road fire. They were then taken to Lee Green Police Station, where D.C.S. Jones and the squad overseeing the murder inquiry were based, and questioning continued. Questioning by Jones and his team was sustained and vigorous. After 3 hours, he secured oral confessions from all 3, which were then formalized in writing. It is notable that there were several departures from the established judge's rules on police interrogation. For instance, the 3 were not offered the opportunity of legal representation, and their parents were involved fairly late in the process. Lattimore, in particular, was given no latitude given his disabilities. This was despite the fact that none of the boys knew Confate before the murder. Ronald Layton's mother knew all the inhabitants of 27 Doggett Road by sight, and occasionally talked to Lillian Good. Ronald Layton's sister had been at school with one of Winston and Lillian's daughters, and the two girls, and had visited each other's houses. But apart from that, the three boys had only gained their knowledge of Confate when Ronald's mother had talked about the death over the weekend of the 22nd or 23rd of April. The police did not explain why the three had decided to target 27 Doggett Road, or why they would murder Michelle. It was suggested that Michelle might have made a sexual proposition to one of the three, who then sought revenge. But there was no evidence that Michelle ever made such suggestions to young men. In November 1972, the three were convicted at the Old Bailey despite their alibis. In his summing up, Mr. Justice Chapman described Michelle as an odd creature, and indeed, it may be your view that he has been no great loss to this world. Appeals by the three initially failed at the first hurdle, despite the efforts of Lattimore's family in particular. However, in 1974, a change of government led to a change in official attitude. Lewisham West was recaptured for labor by Chris Price, an experienced politician who was also a journalist and someone who had an interest in civil liberties. The new Labor Home Secretary, Roy Jenkins, had been a great liberal reformer as Home Secretary before, and wanted to maintain his reputation. As a result of this, media attention on the case was maintained. The Home Office referred the case to the Court of Appeal, which quashed the convictions in October 1975, and an inquiry into the affair was called by Jenkins. On 27th of April 1972, Winston Good, Confate's landlord and possible lover, was found wandering in a dazed condition in Doggett Road. He was taken to hospital and was sectioned shortly after. In May 1974, Winston committed suicide with cyanide. The inquiry called by the Home Secretary was headed by Sir Henry Fisher, a barrister and former judge with a reputation for being a liberal. The inquiry findings were severe on the police and the pathologists. This would, in turn, lead to two great changes in criminal and judicial practice. A royal commission was brought in to examine the whole area of police evidence, and the judge's rules were replaced by the Police and Serminal Evidence Act, 1984. The following year, the various avenues police forces used to prosecute were replaced by one single organization, the Crown Prosecution Service. But Fisher, notably, still indicated that he considered Layton and Solly to be guilty of the murder, although he considered that Lattimore was, at most, guilty of starting the fire. As a result of the inquiry, a further investigation was opened by the Met under an experienced detective, John George. This uncovered a very different line of inquiry. When Confate had been imprisoned in Wormwood Scrubs, Confate had been protected by another prisoner, Douglas Franklin, who also became her lover. Franklin had another friend, Paul Pooley. After Franklin and Pooley had been sentenced for another crime in 1976, Paul Pooley claimed that Confate and Franklin had continued their relationship after their release. In April 1972, according to Pooley, they had been with Confate in Confate's room, and Confate had been dancing with Franklin. Franklin had then taken things too far and strangled Confate in Pooley's presence. However, Franklin committed suicide shortly after initial questioning by police officers, and nothing could be taken further. It is notable that the inquiry concluded that Confate might have been dead 48 hours before the beginning of the inquiry.